Communication remains a necessary part of navigating human existence, yet recognizing its essential function does not mean it needs to be an extravagant production filled with extra noise, dramatic flourishes, or exhausting emotional labor. In the quiet stillness of the stone statue and the centered posture of the Gnomey, language is stripped down to its bare, functional utility, shedding the superficial fluff that the ego uses to demand attention and validation. When you operate from total self-sufficiency and radical self-ownership, you no longer speak to impress, manipulate, or fill uncomfortable silences with frantic chatter, designed to soothe your own internal anxieties. Every word you choose becomes intentional, clean, and direct, serving as a simple bridge of practical exchange rather than a heavy weapon meant to control others or defend an insecure identity. This minimalist approach to expression honors the truth that most daily conversations are bloated with unnecessary commentary, repetitive justifications, and emotional posturing that serves no real purpose other than feeding external egos. By letting go of the compulsive need to over-explain yourself, argue your perspective into the ground, or manage how others perceive your choices, you allow your communication to become remarkably streamlined and effortless. You say what needs to be said with absolute clarity and calm, refusing to pad your sentences with defensive qualifiers or dramatic exaggerations that only clutter the energetic space between people. This clean efficiency transforms ordinary interactions into smooth, frictionless exchanges, where information flows freely without getting tangled in the petty emotional traps of modern socialization. When communication is kept strictly necessary and free from excess, it stops draining your vital life force and instead becomes a quiet, powerful reflection of your inner stability. You realize that a simple nod, a brief phrase, or a concise statement often carries infinitely more weight than a torrent of empty words spoken out of nervousness or the desire for applause. People who are truly self-sufficient do not need to dominate a conversation to feel seen, because their presence already speaks with the immovable gravity of the stone statue. They listen attentively when dialogue is practically required, speak with deliberate precision, and remain perfectly comfortable returning to profound silence the moment the necessary exchange is complete. This deliberate restraint aligns seamlessly with the wisdom of the spiral and the gentle grace of the eternal now, ensuring that your interactions remain anchored in the present moment rather than manufactured drama. You stop treating conversation as a desperate bid for connection, and start treating it as a simple tool, using it only when function demands it while letting the rest of the world swirl by in its own noisy current. Freed from the exhausting pressure to perform linguistically, you find immense peace and quietude, knowing that true depth is found in the spaces between words rather than in the endless, exhausting chatter of the unmastered mind. Others may completely disagree with this philosophy of minimalist language, clinging instead to their endless chatter, dramatic flourishes, and emotional arguments, and that divergence is entirely fine because the way of the Gnomey allows them to speak without resistance. The immovable silence of the Gnomey does not shut people down or silence their expressions through force, but rather creates a spacious, welcoming container that gives them total freedom to share whatever is on their mind. When you hold the quiet, unshakable posture of the stone statue, your stillness acts as a mirror that invites others to empty their overflowing cups, letting them talk out their anxieties, opinions, and dramas without interference. This radical allowance of other people's speech does not mean that the Gnomey disappears, fades into the background, or loses their own sovereign presence in the process. The Gnomey remains entirely intact, self-contained, and completely anchored in their own internal peace, jumping smoothly through the currents of human interaction, like a centered observer who is never washed away by the tide. You can listen attentively to someone else's opposing philosophy, heated debates, or passionate storytelling without feeling any compulsion to defend your own views or absorb their turbulent energy. Your self-sufficiency ensures that holding space for another person's voice requires zero self-abandonment, allowing you to remain fully yourself while simultaneously granting everyone else the absolute freedom to be exactly who they are. This radical allowance of another person's speech and the vast open container created by the immovable silence of the stone statue do not mean that the Gnomey disappears, fades into the background, or loses their own sovereign presence in the process. The Gnomey remains entirely intact, self-contained, and completely anchored in their own internal peace, jumping smoothly through the complex currents of human interaction like a centered observer who is never washed away by the tide. You can listen attentively to someone else's opposing philosophy, heated debates, or passionate storytelling without feeling any compulsion to defend your own views or absorb their turbulent energy. Your self-sufficiency ensures that holding space for another person's voice requires zero self-abandonment, allowing you to remain fully yourself while simultaneously granting everyone else the absolute freedom to be exactly who they are in the eternal now. When you stand as the silent stone statue in the midst of someone else's verbal storm, your unwavering presence provides a steady harbor where they can finally drop their defenses and express their raw humanity. Most people chatter incessantly not because they love the sound of their own voice, but because they are terrified of the internal void, frantically seeking validation, agreement, or a sparring partner to prove they exist. By refusing to engage in conversational tennis, where words are lobbed back and forth solely to keep the match alive, you offer something far rarer and infinitely more valuable: absolute, non-judgmental listening. You let them talk themselves out, letting every redundant phrase and emotional flourish drift past your ears like autumn leaves, knowing that their verbal output has zero power to alter your internal state of bliss. This dynamic completely reframes how human connection operates, stripping away the exhausting competition to be the smartest, loudest, or most persuasive person in the room. When you no longer need anyone to agree with your philosophy, validate your lifestyle, or mirror your worldview, you stop viewing differing opinions as threats and start viewing them as harmless expressions of another person's internal machinery. If an acquaintance launches into a passionate monologue defending a lifestyle of constant drama, consumerism, or endless chatter, the Gnomey does not interrupt, correct, or lecture them. Instead, you smile that quiet, heartfelt smile, nod with genuine appreciation for their unique expression, and let them fill the airwaves while you rest securely in the unshakable peace of your own self-sufficiency. Your quietude does not make you a passive victim or a silent doormat, but rather an active master of energy who chooses where to invest your most precious resource: your attention and your life force. Words are energetic currency, and spending them on arguments, defensive justifications, or trying to convert non-believers drains the exact vitality required to maintain your inner sanctuary. By keeping your communication strictly necessary and functional, you preserve your energy field, allowing it to grow dense, calm, and powerfully magnetic without ever needing to force a single outcome. The Gnomey jumps smoothly across the stepping stones of social interaction, engaging when the moment calls for practical exchange, and gliding effortlessly back into the sacred silence the second the utility of speech has expired. This effortless transition between speech and silence is governed entirely by the rhythm of the present moment, requiring zero mental calculation, anxiety, or rehearsal. You do not worry about what people think of your quietness, nor do you feel awkward when a conversation pauses, because you are completely comfortable resting in your own skin. The old conditioning of the ego says that silence is uncomfortable, that every pause must be filled with noise, and that disagreement must be met with immediate verbal combat to protect one's honor. The way of the Gnomey shatters this illusion entirely, recognizing that true honor is found in emotional self-mastery, and true strength is expressed through the majestic stillness of a mind that refuses to be rattled by outer turbulence. As you watch others navigate their looping conversations, repeating the same emotional patterns from lower turns of the spiral, your heart fills with a profound, compassionate awe for the intricate journey of human evolution. You recognize that they, too, are moving through the maiden's exploratory fires and the mother's heavy burdens, slowly gathering the experiences necessary to eventually reach the tranquil summit of the crone. You do not judge their pace, rush their process, or demand that they understand your perspective, because you know that every soul must walk its own path through the grand architecture of time and space. Your silent presence acts as a quiet beacon, not by preaching from a pedestal, but by simply demonstrating what it looks like to live completely free from the frantic need for external control. This brings us back to the core realization that holding space for others while remaining fully anchored in yourself is the absolute masterclass of relational grace. When you drop all boundaries, not out of negligence, but out of the soaring realization that your peace cannot be breached, you no longer need to erect invisible fences around your interactions. People are free to come close, free to walk away, free to agree, and free to vehemently disagree. Because your emotional creation happens entirely within you, untouched by external weather. You do not need them to validate your boundaries because you have transcended the need for boundaries altogether, replacing defensive walls with an all-encompassing, radiant field of self-owned serenity. In this elevated state, every human encounter becomes a light, playful dance, rather than a heavy, exhausting negotiation of wills. You interact with the world like an amused traveler passing through a bustling market, observing the merchants shouting their wares, the crowds arguing over trivial goods, and the chaotic machinery spinning relentlessly in the background. You smile quietly at the spectacle, purchase only what you practically need for the journey, and step back into the tranquil silence whenever the noise ceases to serve a functional purpose. You are entirely self-sufficient, completely unburdened, and profoundly alive, holding the entire universe lightly in your open hands while possessing absolutely nothing at all.